All right, guys, welcome to my first YouTube video. Um, so I'm pretty much just making this video to show you guys my strategy to scalp in the market. It's a super easy strategy. Honestly, it's pretty safe as long as you do it right. Um, and so let's jump right into it. So pretty much the way I start is by setting a trend line. I typically will set a trend line, um, daily trend line, kind of like I'll zoom out and then adjust the trend line based on where the market's been going or how it's been moving, and then I'll set a trend line, that it's been sitting within the last hour or time frame. And normally, what I do is I set a box. So the box that I make is a zone. In this instance, this blue box. And normally, the way this works out is that I look for the previous red candles, and then they have to align with my trend line. So, like in this case, I ended up catching this trade right here where um, it was a trend line setting from 6:30 in the morning, and it ended up going into the zone. And so that for me is typically an A+ setup. um, Now it's really up to you on how far you want to ride it. On gold, 2 3 candles, few $100. um, and so this is kind of the way it works out for me. So what I like to do is once I jump in it, I normally try to get in the middle of the box. Sometimes I get a little impatient. I jump in before it or like right at the box. Normally, what I like to do is I like to scale in with just with one contract. You can add more if you feel like it's going to go back the other way once it's in the box. And so, like in this case, what I like to do is I like to set a trend line. Like if I'm thinking it's bullish, I like to set a trend line going down. And if it's jumping off that trend line, then I think okay, it's gonna keep going down. But if it breaks that trend line, then I know okay, it gives me more confidence and I feel a lot more comfortable that we are going to keep going. And so in this case, that's what it did. I like to zoom out, just the time frames, 5 minute time frame. I'll go back and forth between the 1 minute and the 5 minute, just to make sure that everything lines up. And so basically, as you can see, this is a pretty um, A+ setup. I mean, one thing you can do is you can bring your stop loss to break even. But in the past, I've done that, and then it ends up stopping me out. So I like to wait at least a few candles before I adjust my stop loss, just because the zone where I like to jump in is a zone where it tends to come back to grab liquidity and then bounce back up. And so, like I said, it's pretty simple. It's a pretty safe strategy. As long as you keep your stop losses tight, it'll work out. If you lose three, but you win one, typically your stop loss should be, a quarter of what your wins are going to be. Um, and so that was pretty much that trade. And so this right here is gold. I'm sorry, it's MES. And so what I noticed on MES is that there's a 30-minute fair value gap, and the market's been wanting to retrace its way there. This is on a 30-minute time frame again. Normally, what I do here is I'll jump in it right at the middle, and then my stop loss will be right above the middle line. And so normally, what I do is I go into tool settings. I will highlight it, highlight the candle with a box, and then in the settings you can adjust it to where it makes you a middle line. Here for me, it's the purple dotted line, and so normally for me it would be noticing like the first pullback on the 1 minute time frame, and then that's usually a good time for me to jump in it. And my stop loss will be very tight. It'll be right above the midpoint. I'm a big believer that if it's gonna go past your level, then more than likely it's not gonna work out. And so like I said, I think I'm good at having tight stop losses and just believing that if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, and if it's not, then don't believe in it, or don't chase it. And I've seen videos where people will have some crazy stop losses, -1,000, -500, and I just can't believe or fathom that that's real. And so here, like I said, I jumped in it. If you notice that the candle hit the middle of the line and came back down, so that's good. And so from here, the only thing you can really do is just start trailing your way down. Normally, what I like to target is I like to target the bottom of the fair value gap candle. Um, in this case, I ended up actually drawing out the trend line that was going up, so I figured maybe it's going to go come back to the trend line, and from there, um, it's going to jump back up. But it was still large enough room to give you some nice profit. And so I ended up letting it play out, and I ended up taking my profit at the trend line. And so I'm pretty big about logging off at 8:30. Uh, from 6:30 to 8:30, and I'm done. If I stay in there any longer, then I just feel like it starts getting to my head, and then I start, just gambling. And so it was about 8:27, I think, when the by the time the trade was done, I ended up logging off. But the trade actually ended up reversing. So I mean, if I would have caught the reversal, that'd have been great. So I ended up getting out right around here. Um, like I said, I didn't think it was going to come all the way down, but it did end up coming down to the trend line, and then from there, reversed all the way back up and continued its way up. Um, but yeah, like I said, this is January 19th. Um, so yeah, and so this right here is pretty much MES, January 26th, 6:30 in the morning, so West Coast. So the market just opened. I don't really like trading the opening bell. I just feel like it's a lot riskier. The market doesn't respect levels. It does whatever it wants to do in the morning. But I had noticed that the momentum was dying off here, and it kept jumping off this level all morning pre-market. So I ended up shorting it. I just kept a real tight stop loss. Um, Trailed it. It wasn't nothing crazy. And then I also was looking into gold. Gold was coming to a zone, and I was trying to just catch the bounce. Um, but the candles were coming down real strong. MA was pointing down, so I just ended up closing the trade. Didn't even get a chance to jump in it. Okay, and so this is gold. This is gold at the 7:30. And so I was setting up this trend line, and I messed up. I had never zoomed out. Typically I usually zoom out, see the bigger picture, adjust the trend line according to what's been going on during the day. And so here I grabbed the trend line from 5:30 in the morning, brought it up, and I ended up jumping in way too early. If I would have adjusted that correctly, I could have saved myself a loss. And I also ended up over leveraging, or sorry, not over leveraging, but my risk was too high. Um, that's just because I had just won on MES, so I just figured I could lose an extra buck 50, or just I started going against my own rules. And I think that's the most frustrating part about trading, that the longer you sit on the screen, the more you start going against your trades. And so this is where I noticed that that I had my trend line done incorrectly. And so I ended up jumping in again way too early, but I ended up redeeming myself. And so after taking that little loss, um, I noticed that gold pulled back to the trend line, and so I figured, you know what, I'll just go a little bit heavier, and just try to get 2 or 3 green candles, and close out my trade. And so, as you can see, it's just the wicks making it to the trend line. So that's a pretty solid sign for me. Um, and I ended up jumping in, and I actually scaled it a little bit more. Um, It's like I said, all you need sometimes is just solid 2 or 3 green candles, and that's it. Um, it's so hard to not try to be greedy and take more, but it'll sometimes it'll pull back, sometimes you get lucky. Um, and so in this case, I ended up just scaling off, and then had my stop loss pretty tight. I ended up getting stopped out, but was still in the green, so that was pretty good, solid trade. And this is the last trade for the day. All right, and so here we got gold again, January 21st. Um, and gold is, I feel like gold is such a hard exchange to trade. Um, one little pullback on that, and you're minus 100 on one contract. And so I ended up jumping in with one here, caught it right at the trend line, set the zone up, and as you guys can see, how it plays out. But like I said, this is a pretty solid strategy. I like the way that it keeps the risk very minimal. Um, I guess the hardest part too would be just being disciplined and waiting, making sure it comes into the zone, and keeping your stop loss, respecting it. Um, but aside from that, like I said, it's a pretty solid trade. I like this strategy. I've tried countless of other strategies. I tried the 15-minute orb, and honestly, that was like a hit and miss. Um, or I would take some super big losses because my stop loss had to be so much lower. And I just feel like this is a smooth selling strategy. If anybody wants to use it, or I'm sure people probably use it already. They probably have different names for it, whatnot. But overall, it's pretty solid. Um, and as you can see, pretty much just you set up the trend lines just to kind of give you confidence or direction of where it's going. And once it goes the way you want it, then it just gives you more confidence, and then you can just sit back and watch it go like here. Um, like I said, this is a pretty solid trade. And then another thing too is I don't know about you guys, but another thing I like to do is once I'm up plus 400, I lock my account instantly. I don't know. I just feel like the longer you stay in there, you give all your money back. Um, for whatever reason, I don't know if this is just me or everybody, but once when I first started trading, when I would get into the market in the mornings, the first maybe 30 minutes, I'm super defensive. I'm really looking for A plus strategies, and after I've been there for, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes, then I just start getting sloppy. And so that's why I like to just lock my account. All right, and so this is another gold trade here. Basically, the trend lines lined up with the zone. Um, Ended up jumping in with one contract. And like I said, this is a pretty simple strategy, but it works. Um, I think a good tip with using this strategy is when it comes to gold. Like I said, I like trading gold, um, but a good tip is if you wait for it to make its way into the box, maybe closer towards the middle of it or towards the end of it. That way, your stop loss isn't so big, because just any little bit of movement in gold and it kills you. Um, like I said, this was a pretty solid trade. Like I said, just if I would have waited for it to come to the middle or the bottom like this, that would have been a golden entry, and then you maximize your profit because that itself, the distance from where I jumped into that is $200. So like I said, it's really just about the timing on this. But one thing I can tell you is when it comes to M2K or ES or sorry MES, um, even if you jump in a little bit ahead, or if you think it's gonna just tap the box and then just jump back up, um, you're typically safe. The stop loss isn't that crazy as it is with gold. But at the same time, though, the reward is obviously a lot better with gold. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. All right, thank you guys.